Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Combinate podcast. I'm your host, Subi Sadeh. On this episode, I was joined by David DeSalvo, who is the Vice President of Combination Product Development at Kindeva Drug Delivery. In this episode, David walks through the differences between auto-injectors and pen injectors. He talks about his career starting out at BD, some of the early lessons that he got working at a large device company like that, and he talks about transitioning to one of the big pen manufacturers, working at a sponsors, going back to working at a CDMO, and all of the different perspectives and learnings with that. If you're not already subscribed to the show, please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. And without further ado, here is David. Hello, Combi Nation. My name is Subi Sadeh. I've spent over a decade in medical device, pharma, and combination product development. Our industry feels complicated sometimes. Drugs, devices, clinical trials, submissions, sterilization, validation, design control, risk management, market access, reimbursement. The list goes on. My goal is mastery, so this podcast is to ask questions I have to people who may have the answers. Each week on the Combinate podcast, I talk to someone about their area to further understand and simplify. Whether you're a pharma person trying to understand the next wave of products, or a device person trying to navigate a pharma system you're unfamiliar with, or a newbie in both areas, I invite you to listen, and together we can simplify by combinating. Hi, David.
Hi, happy to be here.
It's good to see you, man. Can you maybe talk through your career and maybe focus on kind of the work that you've done in the auto injector space? I know that's your bread and butter.
Sure. Yeah, we can start at the beginning and come to today or go in reverse, but maybe it's more interesting to start at the beginning.
Actually, before you actually start with your career, can you walk because there are different terms, and I know the standard is needle-based injection systems. That's
Yeah,
broad brush. Can you maybe walk through the different categories so that once you get through your experience, it becomes a little bit clearer what category you're talking about?
sure. I'm not the expert in terms of formal standard-based definition or even other industry accepted terms. What I use, I can share. I would define a pen injector as a device ultimately boils down to how the drug is delivered. And for a pen injector, I would equate to something that operates more like a syringe. So it's manually injected via the patient using their thumb typically. Oftentimes they have multiple doses. You have to titrate or dial a dose, and then you would inject with your hand. I would call those types of family of devices pen injectors. Where we start to transition into auto injectors, again, they can have lots of features on off different things, some fixed dose, some adjustable, some disposable, reusable, but they all have the injection happening automatically, either via spring or gas or motor or some other actuation mechanism. But the patient is not directly performing the injection or control the injection after actuation. It happens by some automatic system. I don't know if that's an official way to break it up, but that's how I break it up in my head, and that's how I use the terms differently.
Are those are the two big categories?
Until recently, in the last maybe 10 or more years, we start talking about on body or wearable configurations. Those are more auto injector than pen injector, but I think they're a category of their own. They're a little bit different than the other two. So that's now an emerging or an existing category. So you would have auto
So
injector, pen injector, wearable injector, or on body injector.
your first entry into industry was at BD, right?
Yes, that's right. So I was hired at a university, and the first project I was assigned to was a reusable pen injector.
Reusable.
Yep, for intended for insulin delivery. So we had a 1.5 cartridge version and a 3 ml cartridge version. You could dial dose from one up to, I think it was 50 or 60 units in increments, and then do injections, change the pen needle, do another injection, use it till the cartridge is empty. and then toss the
And
cartridge,
so
replace the new
and
cartridge.
so, but the housing bit was reusable over the course of
So you could put a new cartridge in when that one was empty, open the device
new
like you would
needle.
a writing pen, that you would put a new ink cartridge into, same thing. Put an insulin cartridge in, reuse it again. And that device was meant to have a 5-year usable life. So thousands of injections.
That was in the late 90s, early 2000s, right?
Yes. Yep.
What was the landscape like?
Fairly simple. There were very few companies. Novo was around and they, as we understood it, developed their own or manufactured their own device. At the time, BD was partnered with Eli Lilly and Company, and the device that I was developing with our team, that was intended to be partnered with Lilly. However, there were some bumps along that road with the relationship between BD and Lilly, and BD had underperformed, and some of the devices had some challenges. And ultimately, the product that I started on, although worked very well at the end, was a bit expensive, and the relationship wasn't so great. And we shipped a few batches, to my understanding, but I don't think it ever made wide market success and wasn't the home run that I'd hoped to be on for my first project coming out of school. But I'm incredibly thankful for it. I learned a ton. The training at BD as a new engineer at the time, they taught me so much. I had great mentors and colleagues. It was, reflecting back, just a great place to work and a great place to start your career.
How do you, there's this saying that people say in running, and many parallels to it. Summer miles bring fall smiles. In other words, if you run in the heat, by the time the fall comes, you'll be in good shape and you can actually enjoy the cooler weather. Early losses means late successes and stuff like that. Is there anything later on in your career that you attribute to learning in that kind of early project?
I would say so, for sure. We were at that time at BD, there were beyond that project, what was going on around me and other projects I then got involved with after that one kind of wound down. Lots of innovation, like tons of products that were coming out that were just really, in many ways, ahead of their time. We had needle free stuff, we had wearable stuff, microneedle stuff, we had all sorts of accessories for pen needles. We had connected devices at the time, believe it or not, like physically connected with a cable. Yes. Electronic displays, multiple languages. There was some really great stuff. Almost none of them made it to the market. And so I learned very early on that that very well known now and understood disconnect between technology and commercial in the market, right? Like, you can make it, doesn't mean someone wants it. And even if they want it, can they afford it, or are they willing to buy it? And if they're willing to do that, how are you going to distribute it and get it to them? Because there's channels and there's other gatekeepers. So I learned a ton in that moment.
How do you deal with that when it comes to the push towards connected products and digital, and particularly in the auto injector home use space? There's a huge, every company I feel is really emphasizing electromechanical, we need a GUI, etc. How do you deal with that, with the technology and the user? Is it actually something that people want, or is it trying to tell the user what they want?
Yeah, I've a lot to say on this, which may or may not be very popular because I went through this where we put all the bells and whistles and features and it went nowhere. I remain a bit skeptical of some of what I see out there, that it's features because they're easy or they're free or they're interesting and different, but not because they're valuable, not because patients or payers want them or they're contributing in an intelligent way. I do think it's inevitable. I think it's coming, and there are some successes, and there will be more. And so I don't deny or pretend that there's not a future there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that people need to be critical thinking, ask hard questions, connect the dots, be holistic, look at it from many angles, add what is necessary and helpful and valuable. But sometimes it can go overboard, and it could also add to complexity. We as we moved out of pen injectors into auto, many of them now are very simple, two-step uncap inject. And you'll have the device companies tell you how these are so intuitive and easy to use, and you might agree with that. And then you'll have the human factors and the training companies say, oh, but a huge percentage of them are misused, are still making use errors. And this is uncap and press and hold. But now if that device has electronics, needs to be reset, you need to log in or do some connectivity thing, log this, enter that. I just feel like it's getting away from, if we can uncap and press and trust and count on people to do that, all this other stuff I'm not so sure about. So that will converge, it will happen, but we just need to do it in a deliberate and well thought out way.
Then you moved to SHL.
Myself and a colleague at the same time essentially left BD, and we started an office that was the first office for SHL USA. There was the two of us in a very small office sitting next to each other.
Like, what was the motivation there?
So we had worked with SHL while we were at BD. We had given them some business originally to just make prototypes for us. And the thinking at the time is BD is never going to work with this tiny little company making products out of Taiwan. Like that was just never going to happen. But for prototypes, yeah, who cares? You can make some prototypes there. And we did. And they were fantastic and they were incredibly priced and they came fast and the quality was spectacular. And we were like, wait a minute, we've got something here. So we worked with them again on another project, same thing. Of course, we started to build a relationship. We got to one of the projects where it was time for design verification. And in the BD mode, okay, now we go buy production equipment. We buy another set of molds and another set of assembly fixtures, and they're way more expensive and they take forever. But meanwhile, we were saying, but we can make product right now. So what's missing? We need to make that vendor a qualified vendor. What does that take? They need a quality system. They have one. Not good. So myself and quality engineer at the time flew to Taiwan, spent a couple of weeks there, and we helped SHL rework their first quality system. They got audited and got approved to be a supplier to BD, and they became the production supplier. And so because of some of that experience and that time together, as we were wanting to continue to innovate and BD was getting bigger and a bit more bureaucratic and couldn't move as fast as we wanted to move as innovators, Roger said, hey, why don't you just come here? I've got the production, the customers, you can design the devices. Match made in heaven, right? So that's what we did.
And you were there for 8 years. That's so interesting that the impetus, but particularly the start at the outset, because I've done a lot of supplier management, purchasing controls, auditing. That's where one of my favorite quality system elements. And by and large, again, avoiding generalizations and painting with a broad brush, if a company doesn't have the competency in the quality arena, a lot of times it's like avoid. But there have been maybe one or two instances that I've been in that kind of match up with what you described, where the technical competency is just so there, where they're meeting the end of quality, right? You're saying the production, the pre-production parts are coming out great, right?
Right.
And so they can satisfy the end. It's just a matter of, can we make sure that they're showing their work?
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting parts from that, the same molders that were putting into Canon cameras, Fuji cameras. They were making, in fact, they were making parts for Apple Computer in the press next to ours, the molding press. They were making, if you remember that at the time, Apple had these iMacs, they had these translucent, various colored housings. I may or may not have a few injectors lying around that are made out of that exact same translucent color.
Oh, really?
I'll show you one next time we're together.
Yeah. That's something that I actually think is really interesting, because in our space, we always talk about how we're highly regulated in that, and sometimes don't recognize that the sometimes whether it's consumer products or computers, obviously in Taiwan, semiconductors is huge and their precision is insane. Like I've seen PCB manufacturing and it's next level. Their clean rooms just like pharma. Not exactly, but like the idea is the same. And but I actually put a lot of stock in whether or not they need to be controlled in terms of quality because of cost, or like consumer products, or they need to be controlled in quality because they're in a similarly highly regulated. But you went from BD, which is one of the biggest med tech companies, to, in comparison, a much smaller company. I think SHL is now much bigger, but yeah, not at the time. So, what were the what was it like getting into that? And did you find that I think when people talk about going to a startup environment, like you have to have built up some knowledge and experience before going to that. Otherwise, you're just useless or just another warm body. Like you don't have the expertise. You know what I mean?
Yeah, to my experience, and the reason why I think we went and were willing to join SHL is it wasn't in many ways a startup, although it was very small. But Roger had a good, stable business. It wasn't huge at the time, but we didn't really have concern he would go out of business. There wasn't really any concern that we weren't going to get paid. There was money there. Like he had no debt. We had just awarded them these great projects with BD going into production. Like this was never felt like a startup in terms of that sort of risk. Now, maybe I was being naive and there really was. And there were at times we had conversations where he had to make some really significant investments in infrastructure and factories and equipment, that there were some gambles, no doubt. And he can come on this podcast and tell you, his story. It's amazing. But I was never feeling like I wasn't going to get paid on Friday or whatever. So it wasn't that kind of startup environment. It was in many ways in terms of the innovation, the entrepreneurship. And he basically told us to do what we need to do, go find customers. What we would design products that we thought market might need. We would listen and come back and say, oh, we can make this change or add this feature, sketch it up, send it out to Taiwan and fly out there in a couple of weeks. And there were the parts sitting on the table, right? It was very dynamic. It was very exciting. It was really enjoyable time.
And then after SHL, you branched off on your own for a little while.
Yeah. So eventually, yeah, things were rocking and rolling in SHL. We were developing multiple devices a year. We were just really, the engine was humming. It was really exciting. But it was quickly becoming where they needed to focus on scale. They needed to build more factories, more molds, opening different locations. I'm a product developer, I'm an innovator, and that's what I wanted to do. And increasingly, SHL wasn't doing that. They were worrying about the scale. And so for me, the innovation started to slow down, the interest in that, the appetite for it. Yeah, I just needed to be somewhere else. And yep, so I left there. I started my own company with another colleague, and we built out some new technology, which we thought would be very interesting and could be, if not the future, at least an alternative. And so that's what we did.
And can you talk about it?
Yeah, sure. We were developing auto-injectors that were developed or driven by liquefied gas instead of by springs. So this enabled.
At the time, I've seen those kinds of devices. At the time, that was novel.
So we weren't aware of anyone doing it initially. And so we thought we were going to be the first. We later learned that there was this other company that was trying to take an inhaler approach and bring it over to auto injectors. This was Best Pack, Concert Medical, eventually Recipharm. And so we became aware of that after we had started. But their approach, while also using gas, was in many ways very different than ours in its implementation. So we weren't so fussed about it. In fact, maybe we felt because we were nobody and they were an established company that them going into this space almost validated that the idea was a good idea. And if we could just execute better, then we would stand a chance. Or if we had a better idea or implementation, we would stand a chance. And at first it was like, oh man, they beat us to it. And then once that superficial thing went away, as soon as we looked and saw what they were doing, we're like, okay, we're doing something a bit different. And so maybe both can succeed.
There's uh, my favorite animated movie of all time is Cars, and I struggle between whether or not I love Cars 1 or Cars 3 more. And so, anyways, I don't know if you've seen them, but in Cars 3, Lightning McQueen turns from the mentee in Cars 1 to the mentor. And he basically, the movie starts out with him getting smoked by this new young gun, basically. And later on in the movie, he basically dramatically allows the his mentee, who was supposed to be his coach technically, to finish the race that he started. And it's a really nice scene where the his arch nemesis that beat him is now racing with his mentee, and the arch nemesis gets into the mentee's head, and the her name is Cruz Ramirez. Anyway, so she gets down in the dumps right in the middle of this race, and Lightning McQueen is like, "Did you just see that? He thinks you're such a threat that he had to basically talk down to you in a way because you're so good." And she just instantly flipped her mentality and was like, all right, now I'm going to smoke this guy. And she ends up winning. But the I always think about that of just because someone else is doing something or whatever doesn't mean that two ideas can't succeed at the same time. Doesn't mean that you can look at it of, oh, there's one other person who thought that this might be the same thing, this idea might be good, or, oh, look, other people think this is a great idea, so it must be a great idea. I think it's just a mentality thing.
Absolutely. It
So
depends on your perspective and how you look at things. I like to be a bit more positive than negative. I sometimes find myself slipping and try to find myself back.
sorry for the car soliloquy,
That's good.
but so with when you went off onto your own and started developing the gas injector, where did it end up?
So we eventually were licensing that out and to another company who was able to decide what they wanted to do with it. And so we've moved on from that after about 5 years. We had some successes, we had some struggles, no doubt. There were parts of the technology that were good. There were parts that we hadn't quite nailed down that had we had maybe a bit more funding and a bit more time, maybe that would have gotten to where it would have been over that hump, I like to say. But at that moment, we were just teetering at that point, and we just had to make a decision of, are we going to find that money and keep it going, or let them take it and see if they can finish it off and decide what to do with it. And that's what we ended up choosing for a variety of reasons. So that technology went to another company, and then we all just broke up and went our own ways.
And so, what are you working on now?
Now at Kindeva, so I had to stop along the way, but now here at Kindeva, we have fully transitioned. So Kindeva's made up.
Well, maybe talk about that stop along the way.
Okay, so after we wound down our company, licensed it technology, and then I was back on the market looking for the next thing to do. That story is interesting. I was just looking to move from where I was. I just wanted to physically move out of state, go somewhere
Is
else.
that right?
Yeah. I was tired of New Jersey. My wife and I, we were ready to just have a different scene, basically.
And was it I just need to be somewhere other than here, or was it a particular place?
No, we didn't know where we were going to go. We just had some ideas of where we wanted to be. We had opportunities in Florida, North Carolina, but I ended up in Maryland. I just as part of my networking and outreach of what's out there, connected with the gentleman online, frankly, and said, hey, if you need someone who knows a thing or two about injectors and combination products, originally just to consult or advise. And within minutes, he replied and said, call me as soon as you can. Okay, that's interesting. Long story, but I eventually ended up joining and was recruited into a company called Emergent BioSolutions in Maryland. So we ended up in Maryland.
I don't know why I thought they were based in Michigan.
They originally were and founded there and started there and still have facilities and operations there. But they moved the official headquarters
Thank
into
you.
Gaithersburg, Maryland.
And then you were focused on?
Again, combination product development. So Emergent's focus is on countermeasures and public health threats. Their
What does that
franchises are,
sorry, what does that mean?
yep. The chemical countermeasures is focused on either government and or public health first response. Examples are countermeasures for the military and vaccines. Their most famous product probably is the Narcan nasal spray, which is a countermeasure for public health threat, right? For overdose treatment, which is a drug device combination product. And so we were looking, my responsibility was to lead the device combination product development there. There were some auto-injector programs, some nasal programs. We were looking to get other modalities as well.
And was it your first time? I know you mentioned some stuff. It seemed at BD you were doing a lot of broad delivery, and then did you just hyper focus on pen and auto injectors for a while before getting to Emergent?
So Emergent was the first
Because
time. So the Emergent was the first time, and intentionally so, that I was at a pharmaceutical company. I was the customer in many ways that I used to sell to. So I'd been on the device developer supplier side, and I intentionally wanted to be on the pharma side. And so that was my first opportunity to do that. So yeah, so the perspective is a bit different. The responsibility is a bit different. The trade-offs and decisions are a bit different. So I very much appreciated the opportunity and the learnings there.
yeah, what were the learnings other than, oh, decisions take a lot longer?
Yeah, yeah. So now we're getting back to bigger companies, right? Just the dynamic of drug development and the
Oh, so you hadn't dealt with that? Yeah,
no,
that makes
I
sense.
was aware but not involved, right? So
Sure.
the terms they use, the steps in the process, the integration with the device, the lack of awareness of devices in general, even at a product that has a marketed combination product, the quality system stuff, just the cycle, the timing, how we integrate the projects, when we integrate them. It was there, but it was very immature. There was like one product and it was really through an acquisition. I later find out. So that foundational knowledge, there was a lot of teaching still going on that we were doing while we were there within the company about sharing what's a device, what's a quality system for with a combination product look like, how is that different than a drug submission, how's all that sort of stuff was coming out.
And yeah, for me, what I think is hard is like you have whichever way you want to think about it, whether or not the device timeline or the drug timeline is the critical path, you're hitched at the hip, and so it's, oh, we gotta delay in the first in human because of whatever drug related thing. All of a sudden, that relaxes your device timeline, and vice versa, right? We got this unforeseen issue happen on the device side that's going to take some time to reconcile. All of a sudden, the drug or the clinical team has a little bit more time,
Yeah.
and then you move to, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to add that that sort of stuff drove us to a more system thinking approach. When I was at the device suppliers, it was that stuff would still happen, but it would just frustrate us to no end because working sort of full tilt on a project, no stop. 6 months go by, like silence, and then okay, pick it back up again, full tilt. And it was crazy. Then being on the pharma side, understood much better what was happening during those 6 months where there was silence. Right now, I know. Now I know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
okay.
And now you're at Kindeva. So what do you do
Correct.
now?
So I've been with Kindeva over a year and almost a year and a half, leading combination product development. So at Kindeva, we're a bit more in the CDMO focus. So it's sterile filling, assembly into combination products, analytical services, the full suite of offering, including what my team does, which is the device development piece. So if a customer has a device, we're happy to manufacturing network and fill it and assemble it and package it and ship it. That's all fine. Our team is either not involved or just lightly. Other customers don't have a device. And in that case, we can help them strategy and selection, but then of course, if necessary, development. And that's where our team gets heavily involved with the custom development.
Do you like, I'm wondering because depending on what, there are some people who are technical who just like doing the thing. Just give me what who the user is, I'll design around it. And there are others who are like, no, I want to see the end to end. I want to be the one who is on the sponsor side. Do you find that now that you're in the kind of design house space, you get to do the stuff that you really like? Or I guess what I'm trying to say is when you're in my head, right? I've only worked in sponsor. In my head, the benefit of the sponsor is the jersey that you're wearing is the same as the jersey that's on the product, right? So you're vested in it.
Yeah,
Whereas in a CDMO, even though you did work on it and you did contribute to it, you're not like the
I get it. But I'm used to that because I started out as a device developer and supplier to pharma. We were always behind the scenes.
yeah, yeah.
So that to me doesn't fuss me so much. But thinking more about your earlier comment, there is a piece of, you said, do I get to do what I want? And I pause because I think this is like this idea of the grass is always greener, that at the pharma company, sometimes they're not able to or empowered to, or whatever the reasons are, but they're not designing the device. They're relying on partners for that. There may be people at the pharma company saying, man, I wish I could design that. I would have done it differently, or I would do it this way. And they don't really get to do that. And they think, I wish I was on the device developer side. And then we're on the device development side saying, the customer says they want this and this, but what they really want to do is this other thing. And they won't let us, but they're the customer, so we'll do what they're asking for. And so I think there's this, everyone thinks that it's better on the other side. And why don't they just ask for the right thing so we just need to do the best together. Transparency is the best. Partnership is the best. Be open with each other about what's possible and what's necessary. And then you'll come up with the best compromise.
That's actually a good point. I hadn't thought about it that way. One of my favorite sayings is, if the grass feels greener, maybe it's time to water your. But moving on, what is a book that changed your life?
Oh man, a book that changed, like this can go in many directions. I think
Whichever
that
way you want to take it.
I've got a bookshelf here behind me. So let me see what I can pour off mine. I think one that's relevant to this conversation here is a book called Radical Evolution by Joel, and I'm not going to even try to pronounce the last name. I'll completely butcher it. Wow. This book quite some time ago, and I'm due for a reread, and I'm probably going to destroy the synopsis. But it speaks a lot about the I was going to say combination. That's not the right word. It speaks about the convergence of technology and the human body. What can we do with medicines, but what can we do with hardware, chips? And where does this lead us to? And it does it not in a sort of novel sort of way that it's trying to make an action-packed thing, but real deep exploration of what's being done in different parts of the world and different fields and how this might come together and what does it mean for our future.
It also
You,
looks
you
like a philosophical kind of exploration of that.
correct. With a lot of dense technical details, but also like the what does it mean and where does it lead in the future about if you choose to get these enhancements or alterations, if they're elective, or you choose not to, and do we start to see divergence of people who have and have not, and where does that lead? And I don't know that it answers those things, but I found it very interesting. And every now and again, I reflect on this about hey, I can see this happening very slowly, in some cases very quickly in others.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about Neuralink and what that's going to do, but yeah, it's certainly an interesting conversation, and I will radical evolution. I'll get that. Where can people find you, David?
I'm sorry.
Where can people find you?
Oh, certainly. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got a tiny little web page, which is not worth visiting. It's just a picture with some ways to contact me. And contact me through Kindeva if you're interested in any of the services I've mentioned very briefly. We'd be happy to talk to you.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on, David. This was awesome.
Thank you.